on managing access in Oracle ERP Cloud, a topic that's critical for both business efficiency and security. So I'm Emma, and I'll be the host for today's session. So as you may be aware, managing access in Oracle ERP Cloud is, far from straightforward. Organizations often struggle to balance operational agility with compliance and security. And missteps can lead to significant risks, from operational bottlenecks to audit findings. So in today's discussion, I'm delighted to be joined by Verinder Randhauer and Adil Khan, who will be exploring the top access governance challenges for Oracle ERP Cloud customers. Everything from segregation of duties conflicts and excessive user privileges to orphaned accounts, limited visibility, maintaining continuous compliance. So by the end of the session, we hope you'll gain actionable insights and best practices that can help your organization mitigate risks, improve audit readiness, and align access governance with both business objectives and security policies. So just a few housekeeping items before we do get started. So the session is being recorded for on-demand viewing. All attendees are on mute. And if you do have any questions, pop those in the control panel, and hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have time for some Q&A. So here's what we'll be covering today. Everything, as I mentioned, from segregation of duties to orphaned inactive accounts, best practices, and key takeaways. So Adil, let's dive into the session.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, for organizing this in a very timely event here. We have the big Oracle conference next week that Verinder and I are attending. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of top of mind for Oracle customers that have migrated to cloud over the last 5 years, or in the middle of doing it in the recent, times. Recently is this year. What we're finding from our customer base that there are continuous challenges with the Oracle Cloud ERP security model, or the Fusion Cloud, as many call that. And these are just some examples that we wanted to highlight for you. So, what we're seeing is customers are adopting cloud to improve the timeline, their business, streamline their business, and improve the efficiency, right? But they run into some obstacles. And the very first one is just the fact that the seeded roles that are shipped with the cloud ERP are no different than any other ERP. This is not a news to us. We support all the major ERP systems used by the top companies in the world. And so Oracle ERP is no different. Oracle has made significant improvements in their security model, going from, let's say, eBusiness Suite or JD Edwards or PeopleSoft, depending where you're coming from, if you're in the Oracle family of ERP systems. When you migrate to Oracle, you'll see some improvements, like it has the concept of inheritance, which is a very powerful concept that's been kind of designed based on the ANSI standards for RBAC. So it gives you lots of flexibility, but it also creates a bigger problem when you're trying to segregate responsibilities and roles of your employees, and more recently, identities that are human and non-human. APIs, for example, since the cloud applications are very API friendly, it's also APIs. So that's the number one obstacle that customers report to us in the very initial conversations, that as soon as they move to Oracle Cloud, even if they're implementing it, the first challenge they face with their implementation partners is around these toxic combinations, and it can really bog down the entire deployment process and the project, and the cost obviously overruns and so forth. So if you are in this situation, please talk to Verinder, talk to Emma, and they can share some examples of how you can overcome that. And so, for example, there are roles through inheritance that get duty roles assigned in the procure to pay cycle, let's say supplier manager, that can not only create supplier, but through inheritance can also pay the supplier, which is not the intention of that role, as you might intuitively think about it, but that's not how these hundreds of roles and thousands of duty roles and privileges are allocated out of the box. And unfortunately, the scope of work that we have seen from the implementation partners does not include readjusting or redesigning the roles. There might be some superficial effort to rename and relabel just for clarity, but the underlying toxic combinations are generally not removed. And customers are sometimes surprised at the cost and effort required, which can be, on an average, more than 6 months and over several $100,000 for a company of 500 million in revenue or above, right? With, let's say, 300 plus users. So that's the main one I wanted to point out as the risk with Oracle Cloud, as the number one challenge that we hear from our customers when they're moving or have moved on to cloud, and they report these challenges to us. The challenge also is, the second item there is the manual enforcement. So the manual enforcement is, as you see on the slide, is difficult to do consistently, right? Some days you have everybody on their A game, in the car business, they used to call it the Monday and the Friday cards are never as good because people are just not on their A game. And that's true for everything in business, right? Including this. So some days it goes well, some days it doesn't go well. So it's inconsistent. And it's getting very difficult to eyeball things. In the older ERP days, when things were tucked away behind firewalls, it was a lot easier to, just trust things, quote unquote, right? And we didn't have all these cyber threats and security risks that we're seeing, because our attack surface in the cloud is significantly more vulnerable than it was behind the firewall of a mainframe or a client server architecture decades ago. So you run into this problem of enforcement. Even if you can eyeball things, it's very difficult to catch the fine-grained privileges that are buried way down in the security model of cloud ERP. I'll give you an example. So some of our customers are using pretty sophisticated security context features within the cloud ERP. And so let's say we're working with one client that has cloud ERP spread across 100 countries around the world, and they have the security context that rolls up to their org structure and their financial structure and their operating structure. And all of that creates complexity, and to control that, they have segregated the privileges by using specific security context features within the application. So that's a very powerful feature in Oracle. As an example, great feature, great way to granularize. In the Oracle, the EBS days, you would use profile options and so forth, which was cookie cutter approach, had lots of problems with that. And that's true for most ERPs on-prem, right? So it's a very sophisticated feature, but the problem is now you have to not only look at a role, let's say supplier manager, but you also have to contextualize it. What set of books or ledgers does it apply to? What region or location or country it applies to? What data elements does it apply to within those regions? So you may have EMEA as a region, but you have segregation within EMEA between Germany and UK. So it gets complex very quickly. And so what happens is when you're eyeballing things through a BI report, let's say, you're generating a ton of false positives. So you're not focused on the real risk. You're focused on the noise. And noise to signal ratio is significant when it comes to the challenge number one, which is the segregation of duty challenge. Last couple of items are around auditing the gaps. So as I just mentioned, because there is so much noise, auditors will throw their hands up and go to a substantive audit, which is 10x or more of your typical segregation of duty audit. So now you got to test every transaction for material risk and to get comfortable that your financial controls are effective and there's no disclosure risks on your company's part in terms of reporting liabilities, assets of the company and income and so forth, right? So to protect against the financial statement risk, now you're moving to a cost that is potentially 10x of the automation of segregation of duties because you're doing manual audits, you're doing substantive testing with lots of sampling, transactions, so who created a supplier and who paid the supplier, to continue with my example. And so what's going to happen is that if you don't have good design of your access governance elements, which covers, starting with policies that you want to enforce to control risk in your financial disclosure, and then those policies are applied to roles. Roles are then assigned to identities or humans as users, and then being able to contextualize that by region and organization structure, financial elements. All of that will show up as gaps in your audit. And, the audit committee, my experience working and sitting in the board of publicly listed companies here in the US is that the board's bandwidth is limited to 20 issues max, and even that's a stretch. You have a 2-hour maximum board meeting once a quarter, and they can only deal with maybe 20 items. And so if you're going to go to a board meeting with 19 of those findings that are related to your access and your financial risks related to user access because you've rolled out a new ERP system, it's going to be a very difficult conversation with the audit committee on the board, right? So, and that's what auditors are walking in with right now. What we're seeing, that they're walking in with these enormous amounts of findings compared to what the board is accustomed to seeing, what the audit committee is seeing. So it's coming down really hard ultimately on the folks that are in the trenches doing the IT work to, hey, we need this fixed and we need it fixed yesterday. So that's the consequence of the auditor flags that I wanted to highlight, how it impacts your day-to-day use of Oracle Risk Cloud and reliance on it to produce financial statements that you can disclose to the market. And then those of you that start that journey, being the productive members of the IT team, you start, once you've gotten those reports and you've run your own reports and identify all these issues, now the question is, well, how do we remediate? Because if you take away access from everybody, let's say as a duty role, and you take away the duty role that was creating the payment challenge for you, and now you're left with a clean role of supplier manager, so they cannot create the payments, right? Which was your intended goal, but you haven't been able to simulate that. So now you deploy that into your UAT, into your production, depending where you are in the life cycle of the use. It can possibly shut down the entire business from processing payments, because remember, those duty roles could also be assigned to payables manager that is responsible for making payments, right? So now you shut down the entire payment process for your company, and now you got a stressed supply chain issue, which is impacting your customer service, your revenue, and so you've created even a bigger problem, right? And so obviously the point I'm trying to make here is that just like you can't eyeball risks that are hidden, you cannot eyeball remediation to those risks that are also hidden and can have a significant impact and bring your business to a halt in a very simple example that I just posted. So that's where I sit in the trenches with our customers and talk to the executives on a day-to-day basis. These are the reports that we have compiled to make this bubble up as the #1 challenge. Now, I'm excited to have Verinder on our team. He's recently joined and brings 20+ years of experience working with enterprise customers across the globe. And I'd like, Verinder, for you to just kind of zoom out a little bit and share some of your war stories on how these challenges have come up and solutions that you have been able to craft to help customers move forward.
Thanks, Adil. Right, so from an auditor's standpoint, as you rightly said, SOD isn't just about access, it's about intent and evidence. And the question that you get every year is, show me proof that incompatible or toxic combinations are monitored continuously. And to your point, if the board is only looking at, has limited bandwidth, if many audit teams, which is what you see, are still depending on static spreadsheets or quarterly snapshots, that creates audit lag, right? And you get this creep, because by the time the findings are not just reported, but you get eyes on at the right level, they're outdated, right? And then, of course, what happens is, well, you're sitting with your board group, they're going to start saying to you, oh, well, I thought we had a solution for this. Didn't we do A, B? Didn't we spend this money? Didn't we get these tools? And well, what you end up saying there is, well, yes, we did, but we ended up with elements out of scope because of A, B, C. And that's not a good look. It's not a good look when you're reporting it publicly and you have to reveal this type of information. It's not a good look for your investors and the market at large. And of course, then what happens is the business needs to think about control by design model, right, as opposed to a reactionary model, which is what has been happening in the industry to a degree, right? And so you define that risk at the process level, you automate testing, and you give auditors a dashboard or access to appropriately presented consolidated information, consolidated auditing, rather than a binder of paperwork, right? And that's really what cuts, the external audit time by half, right? Demonstrating continuous SOD monitoring through our control reports, for example, and allowing you to unpack the information in a timely fashion that isn't reactionary, that then doesn't cause panic within the business, and you don't have a team of people, whether that's IT or more senior level auditors and chief audit executives running around with their heads on fire, right? And that means that the business impact broadens, right? It isn't just about fraud exposure, it becomes about control dilution, and that's very, very dangerous to any type of organization. And so I think you've got to take more than a holistic approach to this, and sometimes it can be a very large, or look like a very large data lake that you're having to get your hands around and present. And in reality, that can be daunting, but done correctly, done with a controlled project and understanding what your end requirements are, ensures that you can have a very clean project in this area and something that's repeatable. So that's what I'd add in terms of the auditing part of this.
Great, thanks, Verinder. Good insight.
So how about challenge number 2 then, Adil, Verinder?
Yeah, we can both chime in. So, the other part is sort of ongoing from the previous step, which is the amount of privileges that are available to assign within Cloud ERP is in tens of thousands. Those of you that work in the trenches on security with Cloud ERP are well aware of this. I just want to level set that, because it's not a flip of a coin that you'll get things right. I mean, if you look at the statistic of what's available and what is assigned to users, is mind-boggling, right? I mean, it's just not something that, again, like I said previously, I can be eyeballed. And so what's happening is the users often get a lot more access than they need because it's being assigned through some sort of a process, let's say through a help desk if you're already live, or if you're going live, it's done through, I've seen everything from spreadsheets to access databases to sophisticated tools that are responsible for mass provisioning user access when Cloud ERP is rolled out. So whatever method that is, if you're not checking against some sort of policies, you can end up having inappropriate access that is overprivileged. And so that's kind of the beginning of the process. Then the second item you see on that tile, number 2, is the concept of role creep. Not only does it happen when you provision users, which creates your risk number 1, but it continues. Joiners, movers, leaver process is notorious for creating role creep, even in the most sophisticated, well-managed organizations that don't have the right level of tools and insight and controls, automated controls, as Verinder said earlier, continuous automation, continuous monitoring. They end up with having this role creep problem, which continues throughout the life cycle of user joining, moving, and leaving the organization. Item number 3 talks about the consequences when these first 2 risks do materialize. And that's the increased possibility, likelihood of fraud. So, there's stories that we have all seen in the papers where somebody can order laptops on a computer, Apple phones on a computer, or a company card, and then without having also the rights to be able to receive and ship that same merchandise back out, can create, a basic fraud, financial fraud, which has, gone up to $2 trillion a year worldwide for what's reported. If you look at the Fraud Association's reports. So there's that risk. Then on top of that, by having this role creep and overprivileged identities, you also expose your data. And that's a major regulatory risk, not to mention losing confidence of your employees and customers and suppliers, which is, again, a news item I don't need to repeat here, but you hear about those every day, and it's a lot easier in the cloud, as I said earlier, because your attack surface is much bigger because you're now exposed to the internet, not tucked away behind a firewall. And ultimately, this ends up costing companies more time and money as audit findings pile up. The final point is around lack of the basic principles of good hygiene in cybersecurity, which is something that's guided strongly by NIST as a framework of zero trust architecture that many of our clients have adopted over the past many years. And that requires you to look at data and access from a least privilege principle basis. And you have destroyed that by not having good prevention or preventive controls around your identities and roles. So not only is it a problem when you start, unwrap your Cloud ERP and start the work, whether it's the project to implement it or go live, it continues beyond that as you operationalize cloud ERP. And that's the second most important challenge that our customers are reporting to us. So Verinder, again, if you can highlight some of your insight and stories around how are we solutioning this and how can we help customers prevent this from happening?
Right, thanks, Adil. Yeah, dovetailing into what you touched on here, and of course the previous slide, role creep and access creep doesn't announce itself, right? It builds up slowly, quietly, in the background, one exception at a time. You bring in a contractor for a quarter-end project, they're given broad access because, quote unquote, we'll clean it up later, and the later doesn't happen, right? 6 months down the line, that temporary access can become permanent and the contractor's ID still has those approval rights, right? And so I've seen that numerous times, right? More than both hands and, all 10 toes and fingers, right? And it's almost in every organization this happens, yeah? Well, we copied the role, we did this, we just copied it, we were busy, we did that. Over provisioning justified by convenience, effectively, right? And then when everyone can do it, segregation of duties stop having any value. The work that you did at the beginning of your project, which invariably would have been very expensive and intense, doesn't have any value to you anymore. And you're stuck in the mud because you've not using a tool that is designed to avoid this type of control dilution, right? This control design that looks solid on paper, but in practice, it's the Swiss cheese model of access, right? And I've seen that, again, hundreds of times in my 25 years of serving the industry here. And so from an audit perspective, if you're seeing those common repeat findings, you sit in these closed meetings and the auditor says, we raised this last year, right? And it's, why is it still out of scope? And the answer to that really is that the root cause isn't the system, it's the process. And the organization hasn't developed a consistent way to remove what shouldn't have been granted in the first place, right? And, invariably, let's cut to the chase. It is a people and skills responsibility, right, at this point. And it can raise a relatively defensive posture from your IT and audit team, which again doesn't help. And you need to manage through that, right? Process isn't just an automation and a magic switch. It is as much a people problem as it is a technology problem. And you need to manage those, and good leaders need to manage both of those things in tandem and harmony to ensure clean and successful projects. Dovetailing just for a moment, the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, right, for years repeatedly points that over-access is a top enabler of internal fraud. And most fraud isn't about bad people, it's about good people with too much access and too little oversight. And I think when I was preparing for this webinar, I was thinking about this and some of the history that I'd seen, and I looked back through some of my diaries, and the takeaways that I'd seen for auditors and compliance leaders was that preventative controls beat detective controls. If you're relying on sampling after the fact, you're likely already too late.
Right.
Provisioning must be risk-based. Not everyone in finance needs the same menu of privileges. And it doesn't matter if you're sitting in a room and someone's saying, well, Sandra can do this, and Bob, used to be able to do it, and now Tony can do it, and I can't. Doesn't matter. This isn't about politics. It should reflect the risk appetite of the business, not IT convenience. And then finally, review should be continuous. Certification once a quarter, miss 89 days of exposure. That's the way I look at it. So when we talk about automation, it's about making judgment scalable. I think that's really the takeaway here.
Good points.
And for challenge number 3, we've chosen orphaned and inactive accounts.
Yeah, Verinder, I think you're on a roll. Please go on.
Okay. Joiner mover leaver accounts often stay what's the word I'm looking for here? Join and move and leave accounts often stay active longer after a person leaves, right? That's the main issue here. Not either pre-visioned properly, they changed managers, which is a big one, and the role has changed and the responsibilities, and there's no reconciliation between HR and ERP. It's fragmented, and those orphaned accounts then, or orphaned access, or however you want to phrase it in terms of naming conventions, become audit red flags, right? And so what it then boils down to is if the HR system, the ticketing system, and the ERPs are not fully synchronized, HR may offboard an employee, but that signal isn't reaching Oracle in time, right? And so again, you end up with this orphaned account, orphaned access. And if you know how to move around the system, whether you want to do it because you want to commit fraud, or you're good and you just happen to bumble across something and you mess it up, whether that be discounts or quantities, things like that, again, that's just a backdoor waiting to be found. And the irony is that most organizations think they've solved it, right? But with provisioning tools, right? But those tools are often missing the data security level inside Oracle. They're just at the top layer. Can you get into the app? Can you not get into the app? But it's more than that. There are things that you can do within the application, of course, that create it a risk. You might lose the role, but you still have access to the sensitive reports. And of course, automation then is the only reliable way to close that loop. And so from an audit and controls perspective, the first question really that you ought to be asking is, how do you ensure access is revoked within 24 hours of termination? I mean, you've got to argue that 24 hours is actually probably just a little bit too long anyway, right? I'm not saying you should flick the switch as soon as they're out, but if you can do that, then why not? And you'd be amazed at how many clients pause. It's not because they don't care. It's because the process is all owned by 3 or 4 different teams, individuals, right? HR, IT, finance, audit, but nobody owns the end-to-end evidence trail, right? And that's where the control fails, because the evidence shows otherwise. And these are very high-risk findings for auditors, and they classify them into 2 elements. One is their potential avenue for unauthorized transactions. Someone could still log in using an old credential, right? VPNs, things like that. And it breaks the control narrative. If your onboarding process doesn't close the loop, it undermines everything else downstream. And that depends on accurate user information. And it's not about malicious behavior all the time. As I mentioned a moment ago, sometimes it's unintentional. Sandra could do it, Tony could do it. Oh, I'm just going to go and get onto his machine quickly so I can do ABC. Shared generic ID left active can trigger false positives in system logs, and that causes further confusion, right? And you just create a vast amount of noise that in reality is very, very expensive to fix, because you have to then get very highly technical resources that understand what those applications and those transactions and responsibilities really are within Oracle or any respective system that you're using, right? And a practical example might be a mid-sized healthcare client that I had probably 10 years ago, about 4,000 users, but 312 of those have been inactive. And let me be clear, I've seen these numbers way beyond this, right? It would blow your mind when you start getting into the, oh, we haven't actually correctly dealt with our orphaned accounts for nearly 10 years, the entire time that we've had the system. And we've got, 15,000 orphaned accounts out there and our system's running like a dog. It's, and dozens of those will belong to people who had already left. And so it's a control deficiency. Not because fraud has occurred, but because there's no process assurance here. And you need a closed loop JML or provisioning control, right? HR event, ticketing system, right? A lot of companies are saying, oh, no, we've got a ticketing system that does this all for us. No, it doesn't. It's incredible naivety to think that your ticketing system does this for you. It does not. It simply tracks what you should be doing, and it doesn't go in and then do that for you. And so, as I say, HR event, ticket, safe pass action, auditor event. Every removal generates a time-stamped record, automatically sent to an audit folder, and within a quarter or less, you have cleared out all your outstanding findings. And this is the type of work that you have to do in these control design situations.
Great point. Yeah, I think you've provided that insight from an organization and operational perspective. I'll maybe add to that from a Cloud ERP technical perspective. What we see and hear from our customers in the trenches on the IT side is, as you rightfully said, that there's just stuff that, paraphrasing what you said, as what falls through the cracks, right? And it ends up, the crack gets bigger and the droppings get larger. And as you said, Vrinder, there's tons of problems to deal with. So it sounds overwhelming, but even if you're starting from scratch, let's say you've got a new system, you just pop in Cloud ERP and you bought the latest cloud identity management tool from Okta or Microsoft, Entra, whatever you have, and maybe an IGA tool, we're still seeing the problem. And that's really like concerning for our customers and their management, that how do we, we've done all the right things here, but we still have the problem. And I think something you touched on, which I'll just elaborate a little bit more for those that are dealing with the similar challenges in the Cloud ERP environment, which may be a new environment for you, is that even with the all these elements of automation, what's missing in one word is governance, right? Without good governance around access, you will continue to see these problems, because all these tools you've purchased are simply automating the process. So if you've got Okta, let's say, it's doing a single sign-on. So now you can use, you can validate against your global directory of identities against all your applications. Our average customer has, I think, Emma, we did some analysis, 30 to 40 different important, quote unquote, SaaS applications. There's a webinar we did and podcast on SaaS sprawl. So we're living in this world of multi-cloud, multi-SaaS environment. Obviously, your crown jewels are Cloud ERP in this webinar context, but there are many other things where your data is flowing. So you may have your procurement in Coupa, you may have your customer information in Salesforce, your human resource and success factor or HR from Workday. So, that's the reality of today. And while Cloud ERP is the biggest source of risk for you, and because that's where you're reporting your financial results from, it's also working in the context of this modern digital platform that our customers have adopted over the last 10 years. We called it digital transformation many years ago. So you're living in that world, and even though you've gotten a lot of the technology in, what's missing is governance. And what I mean by that is the reconciliation across this enterprise. So, if you've got, let's say, an HR list that you use as your source of truth to automate the provisioning, and let's say using ServiceNow for ticketing, using SailPoint or something else for provisioning the users, all of these things need to be managed and governed, right, through policies. Because what we have seen is that even with all this technology, there's, for example, I'll give you a recent example of contractors are not in your HCM system, right, because they're not employees. And they get granted access, but their deprovisioning doesn't kick in through an automated process. It has to go through a ticketing system that Vrinder alluded to. So there's a disconnect. So there's nobody watching the shop, right? Nobody watching the till. So there are different processes are happening. They're all working well, but at the end of the day, you're still having the problem because your policies across all your enterprise systems are not consistently being enforced. And when integrations get blocked or dropped or disabled, or because you have a version change or whatever it is, That's where things fall through the crack and incidents are reported of inactive accounts that are, many cases, are the primary target of the cyber criminals. You know, they're looking for that gold in the gold mine to attack your systems and steal the most important assets, that is, you know, information about your company.
Indeed. And what about the fact that, you know, limited visibility is limited?
Yeah, this is a great way to sum up what we just started in the previous slides. Is basically we've emphasized the importance of understanding the security model of cloud ERP, because it is very complex. Even though it's very flexible and powerful, it's like a Formula One car. Brinder just came back. I'm a little jealous of him, of a Formula One race. So great cars, love to watch them, you know, zooming by, but it takes $100 million to maintain it, right? To make sure it can zoom by like the way it does. So these are complex models. They provide a lot of benefit to your organization and a lot of promises, but to really realize that quote unquote ROI, you need to ensure that you really have visibility into that complexity. And then most importantly, you have controls that mitigate the risk, remediate the risk that's hidden into these complex models. And the second point, I think again sums up what we've been saying, is that even with all the technology and organization objectives we have laid out, you really you know, find that customers are struggling with who has access to what. And it's a very simple question that any auditor should be able to ask and you should be able to answer. But because of this complexity, we're seeing customers struggle with that, and that's where we're building a lot of our latest solutions, which we'll be talking about next week at the Oracle show. We're adding AI capabilities, excited about that, to really be able to simply chat with a chat bot like you do with Open AI today, to be able to chat GPT, you know, be able to ask a question. Who has, you know, what does Emma has access to today? And not only answer that Emma has access to Salesforce and HubSpot or whatever we use, it's also down to the privilege level so that we really can understand what Emma can access. And does she need all that access, you know, or is she overprivileged, whether it's through a role in Oracle Cloud ERP or a responsibility in EBS or a profile in Salesforce, whatever that is, you should be able to answer that, right? And so we're making things really simple, but today that's a very big challenge, to traverse through the entire security model through a BI report, a custom-built BI report, which doesn't give you that information today, right? And you can spend, you know, hours poring over hundreds of pages of reports by user, by data security elements, inheritance, security context, you know, which is broken up by ledgers, by business units, by multiple elements, operating units, so forth. So that can really bog down. And again, it's back to eyeballing, whereas you really should be able to ask a simple question, get an answer, which is just not possible with cloud ERP today. Yeah. There are good dashboards. Look, I like the dashboards. I build a lot of dashboards. I'm a dashboards guy. But the challenge is the second, you know, piece of it. That are they audit ready? And that's where we struggle with our customers' need to see something within what they've bought, the top of the line product, and they can't get that. And we have to step in and help them, explain them that, hey, these dashboards are great for looking at aging reports, right? How far your aging reports are in your account receivable, your collections. Great job, Cloud ERP is the best. But when it comes down to, or you may have built your own, you may be using third-party tools, all of that is great, but they're not audit ready. They don't provide that control evidence that Vrinder, you talked about earlier, right? That it's not something that somebody can go and say, okay, here's your control design. And I agree that your control designed effectively, but I just can't figure out the evidence that it's operating effectively according to your own design, and therefore I'm going to call this a finding. That's where the customers are struggling with their blind spots. Yeah. So can do, did do. Materialized risk is a fancy way of saying that just because somebody could create a supplier and pay a supplier, and we slipped through the cracks, did they do that? Did they actually create a supplier and pay a supplier? Did they pay their brother-in-law? Whatever that is, right? Whatever that fraud risk is. So these are just elements of knowing your security. This is like security hygiene, right? Are you in control of security within your cloud ERP? If you can answer these 4 questions in a positive, I would say I'll challenge you to do that. If you can't do that today, you are in the most mature segment of our CMM level 5 company. But 9 out of 10, I'm being generous here, I would say 9.9 out of 10 cannot answer these 5 questions.
Yeah.
4 questions.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right, Phil. Coming back to the racing analogy, right? Visibility wins races, right? The driver can only see what's out in front of them, but the strategy, everything else, engine temperature, right? Or tire wear, all these things, that's what keeps it going. And ERP Cloud is no different. Oracle ERP Cloud and SaaS is no different. It's powerful, but when you're flying blind, it's risky. Yeah. And the role model is like telemetry. Yeah. Multi-layered, constantly changing. And by the time you export the data, the race is finished. Yeah. Like 5 laps in.
That's right.
And so, an auditor, with spreadsheets is like, and all the binders of information, business looking at that is like looking for a rain splattered visor, and you see the motion but not the clarity. And so it's control reliance, and certifying with visibility, right? That's what you need to do. And if you don't have that, you can't, right? You can't steward your business for risk, and de-risking your organization as much as possible without burdening it with over-engineering of processes, systems, even your ERP. And that can be dangerous, right? This move, we need to be less risky, let's set it up in a way, but you can over-engineer, and that will slow your business down as well, right? And that is equally a challenge, right? You slow your business down, you risk your profit margins, you risk your being overtaken by construction. Yeah.
Great insight.
And that brings us on to our last challenge. So what are some of the challenges in maintaining continuous compliance, especially in these dynamic environments, and what are some of the solutions to address them?
Yeah, let me take a stab at it, and then I'd love to hear from Verinder, his insight. With cloud, it's no surprise that patches get done automatically. Yeah, they give you a little bit of time to kind of simmer through them, but ultimately you don't have a choice, right? Let me be really blunt. The patches will go in because that's the trade-off you made when you moved to cloud. You want to reduce your cost of ownership. You want to be more agile as an organization. You don't have once every 5 or 10 years upgrade anymore. You stay up to date every quarter, which is great. I mean, I think most CIOs and CFOs love that about Oracle Cloud ERP. I love that about it. But the caution is the change management has become much more important today than it ever was. So just because Oracle is applying patches, you're not off the hook, right? You're still responsible for your financial controls and financial disclosures. So, how much time do you spend analyzing those patches while still running your business? Most customers are either missing this, not, in other words, not reviewing everything that's coming in, or doing a very high level surface review, or they are way over budget in their cost of ownership because they've either outsourced that to a managed service provider, or they have an army of people that sit around to look at everything. And so change management is a key problem that is impacting your ability to control risk that occurs due to all the other 4 challenges we just talked about. So this is what's creating overprivilege. because a patch goes in and it introduces a new duty role to an existing business role, etc. Right? Or simply that Oracle runs some seeded patches that are not that are introducing new seeded data because they've introduced a new feature, and you have no idea how that data got in there. And so you're spending a lot of time doing analysis through BI reports of what the previous values were, what the new values are, and then putting a pivot table, whatever you're doing. So we solved that challenge, Emma, you asked, by giving customers a change track, a very simple report that you can run once a month or once a quarter or daily if you want, that basically tells you what was the previous value, what was the new value. We also have the ability to exclude Oracle identities from that analysis. So if Oracle bots are doing updates, which are non-humans, those updates can be excluded from the changes that are made by the users. Something that Virender mentioned earlier about ticketing system is a great tool, but it doesn't do stuff for you, right? I'm paraphrasing here. So you will be able to use that to reconcile, but the customers are required to provide that reporting for audit, that, okay, you had 10 tickets logged to change 10 different things in your cloud ERP, let's say your approval hierarchy, your payment terms, et cetera, did somebody go in and make an 11th change, or they only made 9 changes, right? And that's where you're finding challenges in specifically the cloud ERP environment, where this change management is a much more automated, accelerated process, which on the one hand really makes your business more agile, reduces the cost of ownership. On the other hand, it introduces new challenges and pain points that need to be addressed to ensure that you're disclosing results with controls that fit into your controls framework. The second item is, again, this is a common problem with access identity reviews, which is a key control and one-time review every 6 months. The question gets asked that, first of all, why don't you review more often, right? That's really should be on a continuous basis. But the second one is that what happened? So you had, let's say, 5% of your population was overprivileged, and you did a great job. 6 months later, you removed that access, but what happened during that 6-month period? What was the impact to your business? Was there any fraud committed? Was there any financial results that you reported to the market that were not vetted and were potentially erroneous because of the misstatement risk that occurred, right? So that's a problem. Now, again, the solution there is to do continuous monitoring around key changes and look at the identity reviews as identities are changed, and not wait for that period end process, but do them in a real-time manner through the provisioning process itself, as well as periodic reviews that are based on risk and policy as opposed to time event only. Compliance needs ongoing monitoring. So complying with your frameworks of security, your frameworks of financial reporting like Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, you have to have ongoing monitoring in the cloud because there are too many people in the organization with their fingers in the pie, right? You need people to be able to do setups. You need people to be able to transact at a higher privilege level. And so you need this ongoing monitoring that is the only way to not be surprised when the audit committee meets at the end of the year, because that's too late. That's just too late. And you've lost all that effort you put in the whole year. It now boils down to 3 or 5 major issues that will keep you from, calling yourself successful and your business reliable. And the last point, again, just to wrap things up, and I'll turn it over to Virender, is regulators expect, the evidence on a proactive controls these days. There's new guidelines, it's actually a couple of years old, around the cybersecurity requirements from PCAOB, the SEC in the US, that requires more stringent cybersecurity controls and disclosures around that than ever before, right? And so not only you have the challenge to just operate a controlled environment that is trusted by your stockholders and reporting results that are reliable, but also, cybersecurity is an add-on, which means that you do need to pay more attention to the security hygiene within your cloud ERP, including those terminated users and so forth. So yeah, I mean, Brenda, if you can take us home here, close it out with comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Dovetailing again, right, into what you're saying there, right? Traditional auditing follows a calendar mindset, right? Controls tested, evidence gathered, but businesses don't run like that anymore, right? You run at light speed, runs real time. Continuous compliance replaces that calendar approach with continuous assurance. Okay, that's kind of what it's all about. And so continuous compliance is small, intelligent calibration, right? You don't wait till the end of the year till you've got a failure and you're running around with your head, your hair on fire, right? And so it then becomes about the maturity of it all, right? You're not reactive, it's managed, automated, and adaptive, right? And when auditors see continuous controls monitoring in these challenge areas, right, in these contexts, their confidence absolutely skyrockets, because they're looking at this information and they increase their reliance on automated controls narrative, and it reduces the manual sample testing and shortens field work, right? And for audit leadership within the organization and the partner, and it's a partnership at the end of the day, right? Auditors shouldn't be hitting you over the head with a big stick. You should be going in there empowered, right, with tools and information and an educated group, with efficiency and, more importantly, consistency and broad credibility, right? And so you're watching it all. It's not a massive data lake of information, and what you're able to do is you're data-driven, responsive, and audit ready at every component that you need, right? Whether it's high-risk areas that you're having to monitor in a more robust fashion versus lower ordinance of risks that don't demand such rigorous or robust approaches. But the premise being that it lives at 4 levels where the system learns and adjusts, and that's where every auditor effectively wants their clients to be. Yep.
Great insight. Emma, back to you.
Yeah, we are at the top of the hour, but what can we quickly, briefly, in a couple of minutes, sum up some of the best practices that our attendees can implement starting from today?
Brenda, I'll let you go with these.
Myself on to mute there, sorry. Yeah, so I think, as I alluded to a moment ago, right, you automate the analysis and that heavy lifting, right? You granularize your engine, your SOD risks. You understand what your processes really are, your responsibilities, your remediation workflows based on the types of challenges that you have, i.e., how risky is this to my business, right? How reactive do I need to be for this, all right? And it needs to be well documented, yeah? Like, yeah, a system is more than just a bunch of clicks, right? Sometimes you're the person who is dealing with this part of the business's processes might not be experienced, they might be new, so they need guidance, right? They need a strategy. Your control framework needs to be engineered appropriately in that, right? Modular controls, clear ownership, right? Apply policy-based access control with least privilege, right? That means something to us in business here, but it might not mean something to everybody, right? Somebody coming into this, well, what does that really mean, right? And so what that allows you to do, what you should be doing, therefore, is understanding your system and stop policing it and start partnering it with the business, right? So what does HR say this role should be? What does the business say this policy should be related to discounts, pricing lists, who can actually authorize and produce information, who is actually able to approve the checks, etc., etc. As I said, you're integrating that to HR processes, and that's where the partnership part comes into it, right? And it gives you the ability to have automated evidence, not excuses, right? And so you can prove compliance, right? You know what? Here's the HR process and what it should look like. Here is the deprovisioning and the provisioning, and it means it's time stamped and tamper proof. It's tamper proof evidence that your controls are there and they're working, and you can be forewarned and educated when you are sitting down with the auditors or indeed the board to say, hey, look, this is what we're doing. We caught this before it became a risk or it became an issue for the business. And you centralize the control culture, right? So as I said, it's discipline. It's not a yearly thing, or oh, we're closing our books, let's just tick the box, which is where you end up, right? And you make it part of your DNA, right? So you understand, where did the process understeer, right? Where did the communication lock up? And make those reviews and the visibility in the dashboards, right? Am I improving, right? Patch has been applied, new version has gone out, new module has been implemented. Have I got better? Have I got worse? And as I said, that builds that control resilience, not through punishment, but through precision feedback, right? And then when you adopt this continuous controls and auditing, compliance, reporting maturity, you're then seen as a assurance value creator in the business, not just a compliance cost center, because you're not defending, you're demonstrating, right? So that's what excellence governance looks like. It looks like reviewing your control performance, capturing the lessons from the audits, and feeding it back into the system. And the flexibility of modern control systems like SafePass means that you haven't got to go out and do this massive recoding, right? Oh no, I need to go and design this whole new application, which can happen if you have an IT bias as opposed to a consolidated team effort where everything ties together across your groups, where the business, IT, and audit are defining the modern control excellence together, right? And so you get a single control cockpit, like with SafePass, helping you stay compliant at the speed of your business. Yeah, that's what I think best practice looks like.
Sounds great. Good way to recap.
Yep, thanks, Verinder. Well, we are over time. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you to both Verinder and Adil for participating in this discussion today on Oracle ERP Cloud Access Governance Challenges. I think we've covered most of the key challenges that we see anyway, and shared some practical strategies for you to tackle those. So we hope we've left you with some actionable insights that you can apply to strengthen your access governance and ultimately reduce risk, which is what it's all about, right? So if you have any further questions or want to dive deeper into any of the topics we've discussed, then please reach out to either myself or Verinder, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. So next month we'll be discussing access reviews and what they should look like. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. So thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.